Big dogs rule. Big dogs ruled. We got some, big underdogs that came through. We had Jaguars on the board. We have the Bengals losing yet again. All that and more on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. We are recapping our top reactions to Week 5. Nick, let's start off with, once again, underdogs. Big underdogs are big rulers. As you mentioned right beforehand, the big spread underdogs are just dominating this year.
They continue to dominate, man. I think teams of 5 points or more underdogs are 19-5-1 now against the spread, and it feels like every week we have at least one or two big dogs go down. Last week things regulated a little bit. It still wasn't a fantastic week for favorites or for the public overall, but back to business as usual this week, where we saw the two biggest favorites of the week, Seattle and San Francisco, each go down, and we'll get to both of those games, as the episode goes along. I mean, just an incredible no-show by Seattle. Every week, it feels like we have one team that we think might be good, might be like a top 4 or 5 team in the conference. Just completely no-show. A couple weeks ago, it was Tampa. This week, it was Seattle. And the 49ers, man, second time in 3 weeks that they've had a double-digit lead. They've been in control of a game and completely let it slip away. So, yeah, another week where the dogs are barking. Another week where if you're in the Circa contest or something like that, if you manage to go 3-2, you probably feel okay about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start off with Seattle because, so this was a big rest disparity. If you're a Warren Sharp guy, he's all on that, and he always points out the big rest disparities. The Giants played the Thursday night game the week before. Seattle played, late against Detroit, and had much shorter rest. Much shorter time to prepare, and they had to travel home from that night game as well, the Monday night game. So, I mean, there was a lot of things working against them rest wise, but even still, Nick, I just couldn't believe how poorly the defense played. They couldn't get off the field against Daniel Jones, who didn't have Neighbors. They didn't have Singletary. Didn't seem to matter.
Yeah, and you point out the rest difference, and that was something I considered before taking Seattle in this game, and before taking the under, by the way, which was sunk on a blocked field goal returned for a touchdown late in the fourth quarter. Just a gut punch after gut punch for me. I was totally wrong on this one, no question about it. But favorites on short rest playing a team on extended rest were 43-13-1 straight up, and 31-26 against the spread over the last 20 years. When those teams were favored by more than 4 points, as Seattle was, then it goes up to 27-6-1 straight up, 19-15 against the spread. So yeah, on paper, you look at this as kind of a rough schedule spot for Seattle, but they're at home. It's a long trip for the Giants, and there were some trends that I thought actually backed Seattle here. And of course, the Giants are without their starting running back, Devin Singletary, and without one of the best young receivers in football, and Malik Neighbors. So that's really what pushed it over the top. Like, I waited till late in the week to make sure Malik Neighbors was out. And I'm like, all right, Neighbors is out. I feel comfortable about this one. Seattle looked awful, looked completely out of sorts from the jump. They were gifted, a 7-point swing early in the game. Seattle goes like 3 and out on their first drive. They led up this, I think it was a 16-play drive. It was over 10 minutes. Giants are down to the 1-yard line. They fumble as they try to go in. I honestly thought the ball might have crossed the plane, like kind of a lucky play for Seattle to get the fumble, let alone return it for 101 yards. So you think you got this great break early on, and Seattle just couldn't do anything after that. You mentioned the defense was terrible. This looked like a redux of the Detroit game last week, but obviously that's a much more explosive offense in Detroit. Letting the Giants do this to you is just completely embarrassing. Seattle ran 18 plays in the first half. They had 33 total plays through 3 quarters. You look at some of the final numbers, and it looks better because they were able to move the ball late in the game in garbage time. And for the second week in a row, Jeff, a huge DK Metcalf fumble completely changed this game. Metcalf fumbled at the Giants' 21-yard line. It was a tie game at the time. Takes points off the board for Seattle. Giants immediately hit 2 big plays, and they go up by a touchdown on the next possession.
Yeah, brutal. And with Metcalf, do you think it's because he's always trying to get those extra yards? He's trying to use his size, taking on extra tacklers, and word gets out, film gets out. Okay, this guy can be stripped. And I think that's what happens a lot, unfortunately. It's you got to make you wonder, like, what can they do to address this? Do they I'm sure they're trying to address it there, but instincts kick in, and it's a big leak in their game right now. The Niners have a big leak in their game, and they lost their kicker, which is part of it. They lost Jake Moody on a kickoff. But the real thing is they couldn't tackle in the second half against James Conner. This was an ugly collapse.
Yeah, again, second time in 3 weeks that the Niners have blown a double-digit lead in the second half to a divisional opponent. A huge fumble by Jordan Mason to essentially blow this game for the Niners. It's like, maybe they don't punch that in and it's still a one-score game, but if they score a touchdown on that drive where Mason fumbled from at the 8-yard line on 1st and goal, by the way, like this game is probably sewn up. I don't know if they cover, but they at least win outright. But you saw some cracks for the 49ers right away. I mean, Kyler Murray, 50-yard scramble touchdown on the first drive of the game. I mean, it was completely untouched. He was throwing up the peace sign at like the 42-yard line. Arizona, by the way, always finds a way to start fast. It feels like even in games that they've lost and, they've been blown out a couple of times, but they're always able to score early on. They do a good job scripting plays and, are not always able to continue that. But San Francisco got some breaks here. I mean, they returned a blocked field goal for a touchdown. Kyler threw a pick to Nick Bosa that he nearly returned for a touchdown. It was a good job by Arizona to actually hold San Francisco to a field goal on that drive. And Jeff, every time a kicker gets hurt, it feels like it matters. Jake Moody injured his ankle, kind of got it rolled up, making a tackle on a kickoff return. So the Niners really couldn't kick for most of this game, basically the entire second half. That led to them going for a 4th and 23 at the Arizona 27. Would have been nice to have those points, I think, later in the game. But Arizona, I thought just, kind of did a great job to hang around, get just enough stops. They scored a touchdown early in the fourth quarter, went for 2 to make it a 2-point game, which ended up being huge as well. And you look at the Niners' second half drives, interception, out on downs, as I mentioned, the fumble by Mason, and then they still had a chance. I mean, the Niners were moving the ball. They were ripping off big plays. They got the ball back with a little under 2 minutes left. Brock Purdy, I think it was the second play of the drive after they hit a big one to George Kittle, gets the ball tipped and intercepted, and that was basically it.
Yeah. So it kind of fluky, but kind of like playing it tight. This wasn't like the Giants, though, where the kicker was injured coming in and they didn't have a pivot option. This was something that at least, couldn't have been anticipated. But wow, it's just it's amazing how that comes into play so much there. They get the Chiefs coming up here soon, in 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. That's going to be, they got the short rest this week against Seattle. Then they get the Chiefs. This was supposed to be the game that gives them some insulation for their next couple of games. And instead now they're 2-3. Yeah. It's just, there's a lot of good teams that are looking up right now. Like, how good are they really? It just, it makes you want to bet all the unders on the win totals, except then there's Kansas City undefeated. There's Minnesota undefeated, which we'll get to on both of those instances so far. But
it's pretty wild if you just look at the standings page on your preferred website. And obviously, we're 5 weeks into the season, so plenty will change here. But your top 4 seeds in the NFC right now are Minnesota, Washington, Atlanta, and Seattle. I don't think really anybody would have had that on the bingo card. In terms of other fantasy takeaways from this game, very quiet week for Juwan Jennings. Played only 36 snaps. Debo and Ayuk dominated most of the snaps in 2 receiver sets for the Niners. And, Debo did almost nothing. I mean, you basically took a 0 with him. But Brandon Ayuk finally got on track. Great call by our guy, John McKechnie, who loved all the overs for Brandon Ayuk on our betting pod. 8 for 147 for Ayuk on 12 targets. George Kittle continues to get his 8 for 64 and a touchdown, 12 targets for George Kittle. Another relatively quiet day for Marvin Harrison, who's kind of been subsiding on touchdowns so far this season. On the year now, just 17 catches on 35 targets. So he's been pretty inefficient with Kyler Murray. And then Michael Wilson, who I was forced to start in a couple of leagues due to injuries and bye weeks, 5 for 78 on 6 targets for him. One thing to keep an eye on for Arizona, this is more so, deeper leagues, things like that. But Zay Jones, eligible to return from his suspension next week.
Oh, goody. Can't wait.
Yeah,
Can't wait.
Power coming.
Fire up that GIF there. We delayed Nick's gratification on Jaguars and getting on the W board. We're going to hit that next and talk a little Travis Etienne. But first, we're proud to partner with Underdog Fantasy for the NFL season. Underdog is the easiest place to play fantasy sports. It's also the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. In addition to their popular best ball contests, Underdog also offers great DFS pick'em games. Pick whether your favorite players will have a higher or lower stat total in this week's game for a chance to win big. You can win up to 1,000 times your money in a single night by picking between 2 and 8 players to build a pick'em entry. We got the big Monday night game coming up tonight, Chiefs and the Saints. I'm really interested to see if Kareem Hunt can go higher than his stat projection and Underdog there. Sign up with RWNFL to claim your free pick plus a first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store. And don't forget to register with my promo code RWNFL to claim your free pick plus a first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Must be 18 or older, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit in www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT STEP to 53342. New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. All right, big thanks to Underdog. Thanks for being our sponsor all podcast season long. All right, Nick, your Jaguars, they did it. They are on the board, but there's a problem. Travis Etienne is not seeing the field, especially the second half. What's going on here?
Well, if you ask Doug Peterson, he seems like this is a non-issue. He said it was more game flow dependent. Tank Bigsby just kind of happened to capitalize on his opportunities. He was pretty emphatic after the game that Etienne is still the guy, but we'll see, man. We'll see. I mean, I've been kind of on Peterson's side with this one for most of the season, but this is really the first week where both these guys have been healthy the entire game, and we saw Tank Bigsby not necessarily dominate, the snap share. He outsnapped Etienne 23-22, but dominated the carries in this game 13-6 in favor of Bigsby. Etienne was targeted 7 times out of the backfield for what it's worth. So, was able to catch 6 of those for 43 yards. Still a reasonable day for him in PPR leagues. But if you're a non-PPR, 6 carries for 17 yards for Etienne, and that has to be concerning. Tank Bigsby, Adam Levitan, had some good notes on him this morning. First in the NFL in rushing yards over expectation per attempt. He's got a 50% success rate. Doesn't sound very good. That's pretty good for a running back. And he's first in the NFL in yards per carry, which is going to happen when you rip off long runs in back-to-back weeks. This week, he was actually able to finish it off. We talked last week about I think it was a 58-yarder where the Jags ended up not even scoring points after he brought him down to the 5-yard line, but Bigsby ripped off a 65-yard touchdown. As you'd expect, Jeff, I got a ton of notes on this game.
Yeah.
944 yards of total offense between the two teams. Jacksonville ripped off 8.7 yards per play. That's the highest by far for any team this season. The previous high was Baltimore last week against Buffalo. They were at 7.9 yards per play. So Jacksonville almost a full yard ahead of Buffalo. We'll see how long that sustains, but just an incredible offensive game for both teams. I thought this was arguably the best game of Trevor Lawrence's career, easily his best game of the season, easily his best game of the last 2 years. And part of the reason for that is he was pressured only once on 34 dropbacks, according to ESPN. Wow. 2 lowest pressure rate games of his career, ironically, have come against the Indianapolis Colts. Shout out to Gus Bradley. We appreciate you. He threw for 371 yards on his birthday, 3rd most yards a quarterback has ever thrown for on a birthday, in case you're wondering. Did have a bad pick early in the second half. That was kind of the one 2024 Lawrence play that we saw from him in this game, but responded with 3 straight touchdown drives after that on 10 total plays. I mean, both teams were ripping off huge plays left and right.
41 points in the fourth quarter in this game. Yeah. 24-17 Colts in the fourth quarter. Colts took a while to they were moving the ball early, but just not converting. But wow, there was just no defense to be had in the fourth quarter. Flacco and Alec Pierce were kind of clicking late. That last touchdown, you're like, yeah, there's some tired defensive backs there at work.
Just bad defensive backs for the Jags. I mean, my God, this run defense is still pretty good. The secondary might be the worst in the NFL, honestly. I mean, this was horrific. And I was telling you all week, Jeff, I did not want to see Joe Flacco. I would much rather face Anthony Richardson right now. And look, if you told me that the Colts came in and put up 34 points, I would say there's like a 95% chance Jacksonville would lose this game. But I mean, this offense is totally different with Joe Flacco. He once again revived Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, like you said, had the long touchdown to tie the game, at another long reception prior to that he nearly punched in. Josh Downs, is suddenly a major factor in this Colts offense. 9 for 69 on 12 targets. He's seen a monster target share now in 3 straight games. And we saw a lot more A.D. Mitchell this week for the Colts as well. 7 targets for him, 4 catches, 438. I mean, he's still clearly their 4th option in terms of snaps, in terms of routes, things like that. So I'm not running out and grabbing A.D. Mitchell, but if there is an injury to any of those three guys above him. I think he is interesting, although as soon as they get Richardson back, I think that's kind of washed away. In terms of other notes on the Jags side, the Jags forced their first turnover of the season right before
That's
the half.
wild.
Josh, yeah,
What a
well,
wild that.
yeah, I mean, they had the muff punt last week, but that doesn't count. That was not a forced turnover. Josh Allen strip sack, nearly returned it for a touchdown, ended up setting up a field goal just before the half. Trayvon Walker, by the way, maybe the best game of his career, 3 sacks, including one to essentially end the game late. Gabe Davis, really struggling. He's been terrible so far this season. Got into it with Trevor Lawrence on the sideline after Lawrence missed him. To Davis's credit, he was wide open. Next time he got the ball, he had a huge fumble and then had a massive 3rd down drop late in the game that almost blew this thing for Jacksonville. And then, of course, we got to talk about Brian Thomas, man. I mean, second fastest ball carrier speed of the season on the long touchdown. He's incredible. Lawrence was dialed in. I mean, hit a couple really nice deep balls. Essentially, the 2 or 3 deep balls that he missed last week, he was dialed in on all those this week.
Yeah, I agree. He just give him more, please. Just keep feeding him. I know it's easier said than done. I know it's not that simplistic, but get him the ball. Keep finding ways. Kirk revived a little bit there. He did more with less. You know, 4 for 4 for 80. You got to like seeing that. Yeah, and they're still playing without Evan Ingram. Another week without Evan Ingram. You know, we were hoping maybe this would be the week, and it wasn't. But we'll see. I think that, you know, I had to make a hard decision in one league on a cut just because I was thinking Ingram might be back this week. Then Friday came along. I was like, I don't know. We'll see. But I don't know. I mean, but Brenton Strange scored again. He seems like he's pretty good in the red zone there. And we go back to the running back situation. Bigsby's also the guy at the red zone now. He's the running back at the goal line there. That's what I think that's going to be an interesting takeaway. Should be, but you know, hey, something to build off of here if you're the Jaguars. But the Jaguars and Colts both are good, get well defenses. I think that's the other big takeaway for me. It's like, we're starting to see like some teams that we can count on. The Bengals are another one of those teams too.
Yep, no question about that. I still think Arizona's in that category. I mean, there's a handful of them. I mean, Jacksonville, the secondary, like I said, is just really, really, really bad. I mean, the front four has been okay. The linebacking, you know, obviously they're missing a Aluakon right now. I worry about, you know, next week they do go home to London, but you face a much, much tougher Chicago Bears defense. So I think we probably see this offense come back down to earth. You mentioned the goal line carries. They only had 2 goal line carries on the day. I mean, so many of these touchdowns for both teams were being scored from like 40 plus yards out. 1 carry for Bigsby, 1 carry for ETN. For some reason, we saw a ton of Dearness Johnson in this game. Like at the end, like the final 2 drives, like Dearness Johnson was out there to start both of those drives. Tank Bigsby ended up coming in at the final field goal drive. But you know, despite Bigsby having the game that he had, they're like, all right, 1-score game. We got to close this thing out. We got to get Dearness Johnson in the game, which is just classic Doug Peterson. But yeah, other than that, I think you got to be happy that Trevor Lawrence had a game like this more than anything, just to kind of get the confidence back, right? And I think the offensive line stepped up. I mean, this is not a good pass rush for the Colts, so that's part of it. I don't think anything's necessarily solved for Jacksonville, especially you know when it looked like they had this game salted away, right? It's like Tank Bigsby rips off the long touchdown. You're like, all right, 14-point game, we can exhale. It was a 14-point game with 5 minutes left, and the game was tied with 2:40 remaining, which is pretty tough to do when you don't even commit a turnover in that span. But that's where the Gabe Davis drop came in on that 3-and-out for Jacksonville. And you mentioned Christian Kirk. The final numbers look okay, but he really just had the one long play that accounted for like 85% of his yardage. So still would like to see a little bit more from him. And you do wonder, you know, does he lose a little bit of the target share once Evan Ingram comes back? I mean, really the only guy that I feel great about right now in this offense is Brian Thomas, who looks like a star.
He does look like a star. Jacksonville, like you mentioned, gets the Bears. Colts get Tennessee. So that's going to be a real test of whether the Colts defense can make an offense get well. Because Will Levis isn't practicing. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's bad. For the Titans, we'll see if it's a Mason Rudolph week, but they had their first little walkthrough today after the bye, and Levis wasn't participating. Now, keep in mind that it's usually considered a light thing. We'll watch on Wednesday to see about that one there. All right, let's talk Bengals here. Get it? Bengals again offensively. It's Bengals and Ravens. Come on, let's give it credit, Jeff. But offensively, Bengals looked mostly really good. One bad drive in the first half, the killer interception at the end towards the fourth quarter, which allowed the Ravens to drive down and get the game tying field goal. And then in overtime, this is where I'm going to have a real problem. Bengals get this miracle turnover. Lamar fumbles the shotgun snap. Bengals get it all the way back on the Ravens 38. And for reasons, they're thinking like, oh, let's just play for the 54-yard field goal. Just ran it 3 times, gained 2 yards. And of course, there was a bad snap or a bad hold on the field goal attempt. And things go wrong. You have this franchise quarterback. You spend big bucks on him. He makes one mistake and you go away from him. Come on. Everything was working all day, 392 passing yards, and you don't throw once to try to get closer in. You don't try to think, you don't just, I'm stammering because I'm so upset about this. I'm verklempt.
Verklempt. Yeah. Good word. Look, we saw a lot of questionable late game coaching decisions this week. This was up there. I think it's kind of defensible. We'll get to the Bills Houston game in a little bit.
That's next.
You can at least defend what Buffalo did. And I mean, the Bengals were moving the ball effortlessly through the air. I mean, this is the number 3 offense in terms of DVOA in the NFL right now. And yet they're 1-4. You got gifted the turnover of all turnovers. Like Lamar had a couple weird plays where he was having trouble hanging onto the ball. It was almost like there was some foreshadowing coming. And Baltimore looks like they're driving to at least put a field goal on the board before that fumble, which was just Lamar mishandling the snap. And that was a 1st and 10 on the Cincinnati 39-yard line. Just a huge play. You're gifted a chance to win this game. And like you said, they go ultra conservative, basically 3 straight 31 dives. Still a makeable field goal, but we've seen this a couple times over the last few weeks where these teams are just content to kick a 53, 55, 58 yarder. Atlanta did the same thing last week against New Orleans, but it was a redux where instead of trying to get a few more yards, they're taking shots down the field. Bengals did the complete opposite and were essentially just taking knees. And if you get a good snap, there's a good chance that Evan McPherson hits that field goal. And at first I just thought he yanked it. And then you see the snap. I mean, the ball was at like a 60-degree angle. That was like one of the worst holds that you'll ever see on a field goal. But overall, just an expectedly insane game between these two division rivals. I had maintained all week, Jeff, that Baltimore is the team that I thought would win. I thought Baltimore should win. I thought they had more advantages, but I was like, man, somehow this is just one of those games that Cincinnati will find a way to pull out at home. And I thought I was going to be dead on that if they at least hit that field goal. And then, of course, as soon as the field goal goes awry, Baltimore rips off the long Derrick Henry run. They kick it immediately, and the game is over. Baltimore allowed Cincy to go 80 yards with 34 seconds on the clock just before the half, by the way. Like the Ravens, I thought actually played a pretty clean first half. The defense was there, and they gave up the long play to Jamar Chase. He had 2 long touchdowns in this game. And then the second half is where things really got crazy. We began the second half, Jeff, with 6 consecutive touchdown drives, 3 for each team.
Yeah, and it was just so easy for the Ravens. So easy. It's just the Bengals said, we're not going to let Derrick Henry beat us. We're just not. And they stacked the box. They lost 2 corners. One, Mike Hilton didn't play, and then they lost Dax Hill early in the game.
He's out for the year.
Yeah. And that was like an immediate, oh shoot, this is over. And so they're hurting there. They got defensive linemen back that were hurting, and all of a sudden, you'll lose secondary guys now. Okay. But it was, and it was all the tight ends. Charlie Kohler was eating the Bengals lunch. Mark Andrews should have scored on one if Lamar had thrown a little bit more air under it. So of course he's the only tight end that doesn't score. Isaiah likely got, very few targets, but he was on the receiving end on what might've been the touchdown pass of the year. Just the best 6-yard play you'll ever see. Lamar just like shrugged off Sam Hubbard, just pushed him down after just this weird scramble. Incredible play by Lamar. Just crushed it. It was so impressive. But yeah, the passing game was working. Lamar played great. Henry had the big run late that salvaged his day. I mean, he had a touchdown early. That also tends to salvage, but for good, long stretches of the third quarter and fourth quarter, Henry wasn't even on the field. The Ravens were doing this hurry up offense. Justice Hill was out there this whole time, and they're just throwing. They're like, okay, you want us to beat you in the passing game? We'll do that. Fine.
Yep.
And it's defensible by the Bengals. I understand why they did it. But it's still, it was a tough watch. Even still, thought the Bengals were going to win. And I'm going to go back to that overtime decision. If you're so committed to the field goal, try it on first down in case you have a bad snap or a bad hold. That way you can just throw it away, and then replay the down, have a couple more downs. Instead, you're pot committed on fourth down to this 54-yarder. Just So dumb.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of emblematic of how this year's gone so far for Cincinnati. Couple more fantasy notes in this game. Keep an eye on Zach Moss. He got banged up late in the game. They're saying the ankle injury is relatively minor, but still something to monitor as we look ahead to Week 6. Continue to be impressed by Eric All. We're always like just scraping for tight end value, especially when it comes to the Bengals, who've just not been a fantasy tight end team for like the last decade. He was quiet yesterday, Eric All, but has looked good overall. Still sharing snaps with Drew Sample, Mike Gesicki. They'll get Tanner Hudson back in the mix, but there's been some positive buzz on him. T. Higgins continues to be targeted at an extremely high rate, 33 and 36% target shares over the last 2 games for him as he's fully ramped up, 9 for 83 and a touchdown on 14 targets. Jamar Chase, of course, 12 targets, caught 10 of those for 193, another massive game with 2 touchdowns for Jamar Chase. And then, we got to talk tight ends here. You mentioned Isaiah Likely. You mentioned Charlie Kolar. Incredibly frustrating game if you're still starting Mark Andrews. Like you said, he should have had a walk-in touchdown. Lamar just kind of threw it low, knocked Mark Andrews off balance. He goes down at like the 1-yard line. Still his best game of the year, but some concerning signs. Only saw 56% of snaps in 11 personnel. The Ravens passed the ball on 90% of snaps when Isaiah Likely was out there in 11 personnel. That number was dramatically lower for Mark Andrews. Likely 55 snaps, 43 for Andrews, 21 for Charlie Kolar. So just incredibly frustrating, right? To see Kolar get in the end zone, to see Likely get 2 touchdowns. Like those could be Andrews in theory. But I don't really feel a whole lot better about this. This was kind of the script, right? It's like, this is the type of game where Mark Andrews could have had the big resurgence, and it just didn't happen, right? Cincinnati, I thought, did an incredible job loading up the box. Before that long run in overtime, Derrick Henry had 14 carries for 41 yards.
Yeah, they did a great job against Henry. And it didn't do much, but the thing is, they tried what they could, but they don't have the personnel. And I think that's the real takeaway here. By the way, so tilting on Andrews because Charlie Kolar's number is 88. Andrews is 89. You think,
I know,
white guy, 88. Oh, that's 8. No, that's not Andrews. That's not Andrews.
I know. It's like, I gotta be, I didn't even know who Charlie Kolar was. It's like, unless you're a Ravens fan, you're like, who the heck is this guy?
Yeah. And likely, and Kolar even got a carry for a first down on a 4th down play on a tush push play.
They're trolling us at this point.
Oh, they are. They're super trolling us there. All right. We're going to talk a little about the Bills' big mess, but first, quick note from our friends over at Vivid Seats. NFL football is back. Gear up for the gridiron with Vivid Seats and score tickets to the biggest games of the year. Every touchdown, every tackle, and every eye-popping play of your favorite team, live and in person. And with Vivid Seats rewards, you earn perks with every single purchase. Each ticket you buy gets you closer to your reward. Just buy 10 tickets, then simply cash in your credit towards your 11th ticket purchase. It's that easy. Plus, Vivid Seats is offering you $20 off your first $200 ticket purchase with code RotoWire. That's code RotoWire, ROTOWIRE. From the upper deck to the front row, Vivid Seats has great tickets for all the 2024 games that matter to you. Just visit vividseats.com or download the app today. Vivid Seats. Experience it live. All right, Nick, let's talk about the Bills because it's getting frustrating now. That offense was in the muck pretty much all day against the Houston Texans.
Yeah, really weird game. Really strange game overall. It felt like Houston was on the verge of running away with this game early on. Buffalo got a huge 4th down stop midway through the second quarter that kind of kept them alive, kept this game within reason. That was a 4th and 1 deep in Bills territory. Houston still led though 17-3 at the half, but there was this ominous omen of, okay, Nico Collins just had this long touchdown, got somehow injured his hamstring on the touchdown. Kind of looked like he was limping a little bit, went right to the tent and then to the locker room. Yeah. So you kind of knew, all right, they got a 2-score lead, but doing this without Nico Collins in the second half, trying to hold off Buffalo will be difficult. And we saw some uncharacteristic mistakes from CJ Stroud that, again, kept Buffalo in this game through a horrific pick in the second half. Just, I don't know what he was doing. Just a very un-Stroud-like play where he threw it right to a defender, lost a fumble deep in his own territory on the next possession. Big stop, by the way, by the Houston defense to force a Bills field goal after the fumble. Buffalo took over at the 15-yard line and gained 0 yards on 3 downs before being forced to take that field goal. And then, of course, we get into the end of game scenario. Buffalo takes over, 32 seconds left, 3 timeouts for Houston. Bills are taking shots downfield. It's kind of a give and take, right? Where if you're running the ball, they know you're going to run the ball. You're probably not picking up more than 2 or 3 yards on any carry, but you're at least forcing Houston to use timeouts. Maybe you're able to take a couple more seconds off the clock. I mean, Buffalo was kind of between a rock and a hard place in terms of the field position, but once it got to third down and you're like, all right, they're going to take another shot here. If this is incomplete, you start to do the math. You start to do the punting distance math. And you're like, all right, Houston's going to have a chance. And it went about as you'd predict after that. Houston takes over with 7 seconds left. They get a quick hit to pick up a few yards and a 59-yarder from Fairbairn to end up winning this game. Again, I don't necessarily have a huge problem with what Buffalo did. You got to try to pick up a first down there. You got to at least get enough yardage where you feel comfortable punting them out of field goal range. But these were just really low percentage throws, right? It's like you're taking a deep shot to Mac Hollins down the field. Yeah. Like there's got to be something a little bit easier. And I know they didn't have Shakir. I know they don't have a dominant number one receiver. But the bone I would have to pick with the play calling and with the decision making from Josh Allen is you're trying to hit these low percentage throws. And if you're going to throw the ball, that's fine. But you should be able to find something a little bit easier.
It's a low percentage shot from a potentially concussed Josh Allen, though.
Well, that's the other thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And Jim Coventry pointed this out. The concussion protocol was kind of ignored when it came to Allen there. And this is something that conveniently happens for teams. You see this every once in a while there. Other times, like you get that independent guy that like, no, you must go and get examined. That didn't happen here. I'm really kind of intrigued to see what happens. I think they really did miss Shakir. I think that does, just considering the state of the rest of the receiving room, that you don't have big separators. Keon Coleman's long touchdown wasn't like a deep play. It was a hitch where he broke a tackle and went on a fourth down play where everything was, everybody's pushed up toward the line of scrimmage. But for that one play, Buffalo had, did so little offensively in this game. It was one of those like where they were so poor offensively. You looked up though, and all of a sudden, like, oh, they're in this game because they got that fourth down touchdown. Like, how did this happen? It's because the Texans stalled out. The Texans looked like this dominant team in the first quarter. After Collins went out, they were very pedestrian too. I think it's a case there. Well, you just saw like, okay, there should be Diggs season, and he went 6 for 82, but there weren't any big plays there. You look at like Tank Dell. We had a question in the comments like, should we cut Tank Dell? And I don't think you should. I'd like to see what happens with Collins. I think they maybe try to game plan some more. Keep in mind, Dell's coming back from his own injury. So that might have had something to do with it. They do miss Joe Mixon, I think. Yeah. Akers looked good early, but after those first couple of series, he did nothing. They're not quite, neither team's firing on all cylinders right now.
Houston's very lucky to be 4-1. Very lucky. I don't think this team has operated like a 4-1 unit so far, but you got to give them credit, for finding ways to beat a couple of good teams. But the other 3 wins have come against Caleb Williams, Anthony Richardson, and Trevor Lawrence. So we'll see. I mean, Houston does play at New England next week, so that's another winnable game. Then they get the Packers, the Colts, the Jets, and the Lions. So schedule does pick up a little bit. Josh Allen's line in this game, Jeff, 9 of 30.
Yeah.
9 of 30 for 131 yards. And it felt like it. I mean, this is not deceiving in any way. And you mentioned the Keon Coleman play. Yeah. I mean, that was like a 2 yards past the line of scrimmage throw. Well blocked, 1 broken tackle. He's able to kind of tightrope his way down the sideline. But that was kind of it in terms of big plays. I mean, this was a James Cook game for Buffalo. 20 carries for him for 82 yards. I would not cut Tank Dell, partially because there's a decent chance that Nico Collins could miss time going forward. I think that would obviously be huge for Tank Dell, but I mean, he was 3rd in terms of wide receiver snaps in this game behind Stephon Diggs and even behind Xavier Hutchinson. They've tried every game. It feels like they try to get him going on like a jet sweep, and those just always get blown up. Like he's had like multiple runs of negative yardage this year. He had another one yesterday, 1 carry for -5 yards. But again, got to give credit to the Texans for finding a way to get to 4-1, but it's been a bit more of a slog than you might think with this offense. In terms of the running back snaps for Houston, no Joe Mixon, of course, this week. Dare Ogunbowale, he was the clear running back 1 for them, and we saw him mix in more at the end of that Jags game last week. Right. 46 snaps, 15 carries for Ogunbowale. We did see some Cam Akers, but this was more of an Ogunbowale game.
Yeah, not like he did much with it there. He had a couple of receptions, but like running 15 for 30. It was just ugly all around. The Bills get the Jets next. Speaking of ugly all around, I got up early for that crap. But the thing is, They did play. There was a couple positive signs for me is that they at least got Garrett Wilson untracked. The Jets did, but man, Aaron Rodgers, frankly, looked terrible, I thought, in this game, despite Wilson getting untracked. And Breece Hall, they can't find anything for him. I think this line is terrible once again, because even Braylon Allen wasn't any more effective this time. It wasn't like Allen came in and, he had the same yards per carry as Hall did. I mean, they could not get anything going. But I know it's like Allen got a big 4th down carry in deep in the red zone. He got stuffed on that. But a lot of times they're facing that contact in the backfield.
Yeah. Yeah, offensive line still a major issue for the Jets. I'm with you on Aaron Rodgers. I didn't think he looked very good. I mean, it's pretty rare where you have a 3 interception game for Aaron Rodgers, and kind of thought those were all on him. I mean, one of them was just a very rare overthrow from Rodgers, who was trying to fit that ball. I think it was Alan Lazard over the middle. It was a tough throw. You had 3 defenders in the area, but just kind of sailed it over his head. Pretty easy pick. Andrew Van Ginkel, of course, continuing to do what he does. It doesn't seem to matter what team he plays for. He's always going to find his way into a pick 6, which he had early in this game to put Minnesota up 10-0. I mean, this was a little dicier than it should have been. I mean, Minnesota was up 17-0, with just a few minutes left in the first half. And both of the Jets touchdowns in this game came on drives where they took over in Vikings territory. They had a long punt return to set them up deep in Vikings territory for the first touchdown. And then after a Sam Darnold interception, they took over again in Minnesota territory. So you look at the points that Rodgers did put up. I mean, they took over at like the 35 and the 40, right? It's not like he was leading these long drives by any means. And you mentioned Garrett Wilson, 22 targets. We love that for fantasy. Somehow only turned those into 101 yards, 13 catches, 101 yards and a touchdown. I mean, given what we've seen from Wilson so far this season, you'll absolutely take that. But that's the second fewest yards in a game for any receiver who's seen 20 plus targets over the last 14 seasons. I mean, it's like literally like a bottom 5 percentile outcome considering the number of targets that he saw. Jets running game completely non-existent again, as you mentioned. I mean, just another terrible game for Breece Hall. Last 3 games for Breece Hall, 35 carries, 81 rushing yards, no touchdowns.
Yeah, just it's and every time he got a carry, there was just nothing there. I mean, you were kind of hoping, okay, maybe they'll just throw to Hall a lot more. Maybe that's the way we can unload. Nope, that didn't happen either. 4 targets, and his
target share has declined in 4 straight games, by the way.
Yeah, it's just super frustrating. But this is also a game where Rodgers threw the ball 54 times too.
Yeah, that's not what you want.
No, not at all. Not at all. For 244 yards, by the way. That he got sacked 3 times, 3 picks. That first half was just artwork. I mean, they got the late touchdown that salvaged some of the half. And that's only because of the big, that's only because they got some turnover help there too. But it was the Vikings were not playing well offensively. They opened the door for the Jets, but the Jets couldn't walk through.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought this was easily Sam Darnold's worst game of the season. I mean, not even close. He was very bad, very, very bad throughout this game. And made a couple big throws late to end up kind of sealing it for Minnesota. But this was more like old Sam Darnold than the Darnold that we'd seen through the first 4 weeks of the year. It was just off target for most of the day. Couple other fantasy notes here. Aaron Jones left the game early on, looked good before exiting, but went down with a hip injury. He's getting an MRI today, so we should have more info on that. Unfortunately, you just kind of are always waiting for something like this with Aaron Jones. Would not be surprised if he misses time. It was pretty much exclusively Ty Chandler after Aaron Jones went out, but a notable downgrade, right? I mean, Ty Chandler is huge. Okay. I mean, he is nowhere near the type of back that Aaron Jones is. And, just feels like there was a lot of plays where it's like, man, that should have been a 7 or 8 yard run and it went for 3 or 4 yards. And that's kind of what you're getting with Ty Chandler, 14 carries for 30 yards. So if Aaron Jones does miss time, there's going to be value here, but I almost look at it as like Trey Sermon taking over for Jonathan Taylor, where you're like, all right, I have to buy in on the opportunity, but I don't really want the player because I don't think he's that good. But if Aaron Jones does miss a week or two, then, obviously you got to take a look at Chandler.
See, and I thought Chandler was actually better than that. And maybe something that has to do with the matchup too, a little bit, but he also had, Darnold got credited with the fumble, but that pitch play that was a fumble was really on Chandler. As even the coach acknowledged, he goes, he made a bad play, at halftime. I think O'Connell even said, hey, we still believe in him. We're still going to keep rolling with him here. But, it was clearly attributed to Chandler, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, they don't really have another choice but to roll with him, right? It's like Myles
Mhm.
Gaskin, I think, was the only other active running back. Saw a lot of CJ Ham in this game. He's actually pretty solid. I actually don't mind seeing that. Tyler Conklin, 23 targets for him over the last 3 games. Just, somebody to monitor if you're in need of tight end help. Ultimately, pretty low ceiling. But you're always scratching and clawing for anything at tight end. Jalen Naylor seems to be, very clearly the wide receiver 3 now in Minnesota, with Addison back in the mix, as you'd expect, but snap share was pretty healthy for him. And then,
but
we
not a
haven't talked
target.
about this. Yeah.
Not a single target, though.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what happens in a game like this where Darnold's off target and, Jefferson had 14 targets himself. Something to keep in mind, TJ Hawkinson, should see him back for this Minnesota team in the next few weeks. Haven't talked about him really since the early days of draft season, but for a 5-0 Vikings team that's rolling right now, they get the Lions coming up after their bye, then the Rams and the Colts and the Jaguars. So some appealing matchups coming up for TJ Hawkinson to potentially walk back into.
Yeah, so they got the bye, but his practice window opened up on Friday. They did it then. As curious timing considering the bye. Like he gets one practice, then a week off. I mean, it's just it's kind of odd there to see that. I wonder what sort of work he'll be doing in the interim there, but if any. But so he might be back in week 7, so we'll see about that. But anyways, that should be that should be just one more added weapon for them there. We're going to talk about the remainder of the games, but first, quick note from our final sponsor, Circa. Not our last read, but maybe not final sponsor. We love Circa. It's football season, and the best place to catch the games is at Circa Resort and Casino in downtown Vegas. They're the best pool in history and stadium swim. 3 levels, 6 pools, 143-foot diagonal screen. You can even, they have a sports book down there at the swim. It's amazing. Huge sports book inside. Sports, everywhere. Every bar's got television. Television's going on. Whether it's Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, Stadium Swim is America's favorite place to watch football. No matter the size of your group, Stadium Swim is the place for you. From owner suites to cabanas, day beds to stadium booths, there are seating choices for everyone. And the best part, Stadium Swim is open 365 days a year. With the temperature-controlled pools, it's a great place to catch the games all season long. Stadium Swim, located at Circa Resort and Casino in downtown Las Vegas. Book today at circalasvegas.com. All right, let's rapid fire through some of these other games. A lot of interesting, I thought the other interesting result in the early window was the Commanders just smoking the Cleveland Browns, just destroying them. I think you even said this is one where if we looked ahead of time, if we did this game 3 weeks from now, the line would be different. I was wrong. I thought the Browns had something left in them. They don't.
They absolutely don't. This is one where I think it was a popular play to fade Washington, coming off of 2 straight, basically perfect games for Jane Daniels. And you think, all right, maybe this is the comeback down to earth spot. I think this Browns defense, I know it's banged up. They have as many injuries on both sides as any team, but this Browns defense is not the same, man. I mean, this is nowhere near the unit that was shutting down everybody last season, especially at home. And, offensively, the Browns are yet to score 20 points in any of their 5 games. 17, 18, 15, 16, 13 points through 5 weeks. I mean, this played out pretty much exactly like every Browns game so far this season. They go out on downs on their first possession of the game. They actually did get some stops early on. They forced a red zone interception on a 3rd and goal from Jane Daniels, kind of a rare mistake from him. But after that, Washington started hitting the gas, and this team just piles up points effortlessly. And they've done it now against, 4 or 5 different defenses on the year. So I don't know if we can just keep playing the matchup game anymore. And this, compared to the last couple of weeks, this wasn't even a great game for Jaden Daniels. 14 of 25, like we said, had the pick. They lost a fumble by Terry McLaurin as well to kind of keep Cleveland hanging around. But by halftime, you just felt like the Browns' chances to say in this game had evaporated. Washington was able to put a touchdown on the board with about 30 seconds left. That made it a 24-3 game. I mean, Cleveland has showed us no capability whatsoever of climbing back into games, playing from behind, which they have to do just about every week. But I just have in my notes just a vintage 2024 Cleveland Browns game. Watson was sacked 7 times. He threw for 125 yards on 28 attempts. Just really nothing going. They got David Njoku back. He had an early catch. That was about it. Didn't really make much of an impact for this offense. I mean, The Jameis Winston calls continue to get louder and louder. I know Kevin Stefanski said after the game, no, we're not making that change.
Right. I thought that was interesting.
Like what, these last couple of weeks you watch Watson, it's not like he's making these killer plays. He's not moving the needle at all. It's like, I don't think Watson is necessarily the number one issue that the Browns have, but part of the sell with Deshaun Watson is that he's the guy that helps you overcome, players making mistakes, overcome injuries, overcome, lack of talent around him. And look, I don't know if there's anybody out there who still thinks Deshaun Watson is coming back. Like Houston Watson's still in there somewhere. No, it's not happening. It's not happening, man. And they had such an easy start to their schedule. I mean, their last 4 games, Jacksonville, the Giants, the Raiders, and the Commanders, that was their chance. That was their chance to get off to a good start. You're 1-4 now. You got to go to Philly. You get the Bengals, the Ravens, the Chargers, the Saints, the Steelers, the Broncos, the Steelers, the Chiefs, and the Bengals, essentially to end your season. I mean, the Brown season's over.
Yeah. I think the Browns and the Bengals are in a similar boat. The Bengals had, they lost a home game to the Commanders. They lost a home game to the Pats. And that one's looking up to be like what we thought they were. And the Bengals couldn't take advantage of that. And yes, they lost to the Ravens yesterday, but that was still the home game against the Ravens, the one they're supposed to win. So yeah, I think they're in similar boats. I think there's less hope for the Browns just because the way they're playing.
Yes.
It's just,
it's
ugly.
I mean, the Bengals are third in DVOA. I mean, the Bengals are a good team that is just finding ways to lose games. The Browns are a terrible team that's just getting hammered every single week. On the Washington side of things, Jaden Daniels did get off to a very slow start. He had like 3 fantasy points midway through the second quarter, but really picked it up midway through the game. Finished with 11 carries for 82 yards. Had 2 runs where he was brought down inside the 5-yard line, so easily could have added a touchdown to that line. Ended up being Brian Robinson and McNichols vulturing a couple of touchdowns. Brian Robinson, by the way, now has 5 rushing touchdowns on the year. All have come from 7 yards or shorter.
Yeah, they're converting them. I gotta say that's the one thing is they're very committed to running the ball in the red zone, and because it's working. They're doing really well with that. Austin Eckler, he looked good on a couple of plays. Yeah. He has some juice. He went, he's coming back from the concussion, 6 for 67. Also had a 33-yard catch. He had some open field plays. The long one in the first half, he made people miss in the open field. That was vintage Eckler.
I was so wrong on that. I thought he was beyond cooked, and I wanted no part of Austin Eckler. I don't think I have him on a single team, and he's looked good, man. He's looked good, and obviously he missed last week with the concussion. Ended up leading Washington in running back snaps. Only 6 carries, 2 targets on 32 snaps, but good to see him back in the mix. I think the Eckler Robinson dynamic, it works, man. It works. I don't know how it's working, but it is working. Terry McLaurin continues to be, kind of this relatively low volume, but big play receiver now. 4 for 112 for him. De'Ami Brown had a nice long touchdown on a perfect throw from Jaden Daniels. Washington ended up outgaining the Browns 434 to 212 in terms of total yardage. And one final note on the Commanders. This team continues to just be unbelievable, both in the red zone. They have 13 touchdowns on 23 red zone trips. They have the most red zone trips of any team in the NFL pending the Monday night game. And they're even better on 3rd and 4th downs. I mean, they were 10 of 19 on 3rd and 4th downs this week, 8 of 8 on the season now on 4th down.
Yeah, not all of them were against the Bengals. Who knew? Yeah, it just felt like it there. Yeah, absolutely. They're great. I mean, the crowd is embracing them. Excitement is back in DC. This is, one of those teams that have been beaten down for so long. When they get a great team, or at least even a good team. I'm not going to call them great now, but good. They're getting embraced, and it's fun to watch. It's really kind of fun. Big showdown though. Again, regional showdown against the Ravens next week. So should be interesting to see how that one plays out. All of a sudden, the Ravens defense looks like you can move it against them. Although maybe that was just that the Bengals were a high functioning offense. So we'll see about that. But yeah, should be a fun game. Really looking forward to that.
Yeah, Baltimore, an early 6.5 point favorite at home in that one. Totals at 52.5, one of the highest totals of the year.
I hope it lives up to that there. I'd love to see a shootout there. And hey, Commanders defense got 7 sacks against Watson. I mean, I think it's just because their tackle problem is massive and Watson's terrible. So I think both of those things work. You send a lot of pressure against him and it works. There's a couple of plays like, how did he not get a throw off? There was a couple of those plays in that game.
Yeah.
Less said about Watson.
That's every week for the Browns at this point.
Yeah, it sure is. All right. Cowboys Steelers, another NFC East versus AFC North showdown. The NFC East came up triumphant in this one too. Crazy game. Obviously, we had the delayed start.
Yeah.
You had some red zone turnovers for the Cowboys. That this game could have gone a lot of different ways.
Yeah, Cowboys were definitely the better team here. That was the right side. But it came down to a 4th and goal, right? I mean, I was on Pittsburgh -1.5. Did catch the under, which was great. The total was way too high in this game, even before we knew about the crazy rain that delayed the start. But the Steelers had their chance. I mean, I think in a game like this where you're overmatched in terms of quarterback play and whatnot, for it to come down to a 4th and goal from the 5-yard line, in Pittsburgh, you'd like to think you could trust that defense. I thought it was a great play design by Dallas, to bring the receiver all the way across the field. You saw there was some confusion in the secondary for Pittsburgh, and the cornerback just kind of a step late, trying to follow him into the corner of the end zone, but no pressure on that play from Pittsburgh. That was something that stood out. I mean, they had a couple of times where they got to Dak.
Yeah.
But all in all, I thought that Cowboys offensive line actually held up pretty well relative to the last time that we saw them against the Giants last week. Steelers won the turnover battle 3-0, still lose at home. That's frustrating. I thought Justin Fields was just okay. It was pretty shaky. He had his usual 5 or 6 just complete misses down the field. We briefly saw some Kyle Allen in this game when Fields missed 3 or 4 plays. Allen came in, had a great handoff on his first snap and then completed a pass down the field. Fields came in to finish off that drive. But really, we just talked about Washington and how effective they are on third downs. That was the difference in the game. Cowboys were 9 of 15 converting third downs. It was just over and over, these slant plays, these quick outs where the Steelers were just a step slow. Pittsburgh 3 of 12 on third down. Dallas nearly doubled up Pittsburgh in terms of yardage. Saw a lot of penalties on both sides. Good to see Rico Dowdle, by the way. This Dallas running game has been so bad. Rico Dowdle, best game of the year, 20 for 87, 2 catches for 27 yards, including a touchdown. Bit of a quiet night for CeeDee Lamb, who once again got into it with Dak Prescott after he threw a pick, 5 for 62 for CeeDee. But as the broadcast did a good job of pointing out, CeeDee was seeing a ton of doubles, saw a lot of Minka Fitzpatrick kind of shadowing him over the middle, and that's what led to Jalen Tolbert leading the Cowboys with 10 targets.
Yeah, and Tolbert was actually on the field 2 more snaps than CeeDee, but I think that was kind of run play only sort of situations there. Ferguson was a slow starter, but ended up 6 for 70. He's just become a solid third down option for them as well. He's one of those few tight ends. I'm I'm happy I have him. That one's worked out pretty well. This was never going to be a great matchup for the Cowboys offense. And yet you walk away and Dak's still at 352 passing yards. Dowdle got his production 2 weeks in a row. By the way, Dowdle's been good. And he's clearly the guy over Elliott. You're not hearing any more calls for Dalvin Cook. It's Rico Dowdle is now your clear starter. He's not an amazing starter, but he's solid enough. Although had the Steelers recovered that fumble at the goal line at the end, we might be talking in different tones. What a hit on that play.
God, incredible play. I mean, just great timing. And the ball just, it's sitting there. Felt like for 30 minutes, engaged, especially as a Steelers better. I'm just oh my God, how is nobody grabbing this? I don't think anybody really even saw that it was a fumble because of all the calamity at the goal line. And I believe it ended up being Dak who was able to get on the ball, but that was huge. That was huge. And it came down to just the inability to get one stop for Pittsburgh in that situation. You mentioned Ferguson. I have him in my notes as well. Just super steady. I don't think so he's played 4 games. His max fantasy points in a game was week 3 where he had 15.5. He's still the tight end 4 on the year in terms of average production in PPR leagues. You'll take that at pretty low ceiling, I think, relative to someone like George Kittle or Brock Bowers. But you're totally fine locking Jake Ferguson into your lineup every week, especially considering where you drafted him relative to some of these other tight ends. And then we got to talk about George Pickens. Yeah. Only 34 snaps. 34 snaps for George Pickens. Vastly outsnapped by both Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson. Played only 1 of 19 snaps in 2 wide receiver personnel for the Steelers last night. And Mike Tomlin was asked about this directly in the postgame, and he said he, quote, wanted to minimize Pickens' reps in order to get more productivity. He used the term rep manage, and he said they're hoping to get higher quality play out of Pickens by playing him less.
To me, that's it. I don't think he blocks. And I think when you're in 12, it's the Steelers are a lot, and you're a run-heavy team. You need wide receivers that block, and I don't think he does that very well. I think that's where I'm going.
I think there are some underlying effort issues. There were some clips going around of there was a couple passing plays where Pickens essentially decided that it wasn't going to him and didn't even run a route, just barely got off the line of scrimmage.
Yep. Yep. So apparently it didn't work, whatever it was doing there. But as a consequence, no receiver had more than 35 yards receiving. And actually, that was Najee Harris. Van Jefferson, 3 for 26. Pickens, 3 for 26. But it's interesting to me. The punditry was all talking about how it might be Russell Wilson's season against the Raiders next week. Fields was terrible. I mean, we got to say he was really bad in this game.
Yeah, I mean, he's Justin Fields. It's like, what are the expectations? I thought early on they did a good job getting him some designed runs, some QB power type of plays, some RPOs. Got away from that as the game went along. I mean, it really felt like Pittsburgh was just kind of playing for this to be a one drive game at the end, and it was like, all right, we're either gonna have to win the game or we're gonna have to get a stop, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, I think they were in the position that they felt okay about and just couldn't get said stop. I mean, there was a drop by Connor Hayward on a deep ball early in the game. Really nice throw from Justin Fields. That would have been a huge play. And then I believe it was Calvin Austin who had another one as well. He just missed Darnell Washington and what would have been a big play. But those are the margins, right? That a good quarterback, even someone like Russell Wilson, probably hits at least one of those throws. And you just can't consistently trust Justin Fields to put that ball on the spot.
But does Russell Wilson hit those plays? I'm not so sure.
I don't know anymore. Who knows?
Yeah, but we'll see. We haven't seen him this year, but we'll see. But he hasn't given us a reason in a while.
No, very, very true. All right, what do we got left here? We got Panthers, Bears, Dolphins, Pats.
We got Packers is next on my list.
Yeah. All right,
let's do Packers, Rams real quick. This was I was told, Nick, that this was Dontavian Wicks' season. I was telling people this, and it didn't happen.
Massively disappointing day for Wicks. Green Bay came through. They delivered us the cover. That's great. But Packers made this harder than it needed to be. Just some very Packers-y mistakes early on, and a massively disappointing day for Dontavian Wicks. I mean, was targeted 7 times, brought in only 2 of those, had 2 big drops. A couple of those were reminiscent of what we saw from him last week. I mean, one of them just went right off his hands, just a lack of concentration. And then another one, on a deep ball where you're like, I shouldn't say you have to catch that, but it hit him right in the hands. Kind of caught him in the shoulder pads, right? I mean, those are the type of plays that you see receivers make around the NFL. Top
receivers make that catch.
Right. Good receivers make that. Yeah. I mean, it's a catch you got to bring in, right? Especially if you're somebody who's kind of fighting for your reputation in the NFL right now. So that was disappointing. Packers started this game, punt, touchdown, punt, pick 6, field goal in the first half, just kind of swinging all over the place. Jordan Love went full Will Levis mode on said pick 6, where, he just did not sense the blitz coming around from his blind side at all. Got hit. I mean, good job by Love to avoid a fumble, to avoid the initial safety. But, just kind of limp arming that throw out of the end zone directly into the arms of a Rams player who was literally able to just walk into the end zone for a pick 6. So that set the Packers back. Green Bay was just 1 of 8 on third downs in this game. They did not convert a third down until midway through the fourth quarter. They had 2 that they were gifted on penalties, but they did not actually convert one until the fourth quarter. And this Packers defense, yet again, I mean, I guess they got the big stop when they needed. They forced a fumble from Kyren Williams. That was huge on the first drive of the second half for the Rams, but the run defense was a little bit shaky. They're still not able to generate a ton of pressure on a really bad offensive line. Rashawn Gary has been totally MIA so far this season. And, I think they missed Jair Alexander to some degree in that secondary, but I wouldn't say it's a game the Packers were lucky to win because they were the better team, but it wasn't as emphatic necessarily as some might thought it would have been.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Rams ran 76 plays compared to the Packers only 58, and that's with a pick 6 for a touchdown. Right. So think about that. It just showed that it was harder for them to get off the field. They didn't give up big plays. I will say that there was 131 yarder by Whittington, 130-yard run by Williams. So those were a couple of big ones, but for the most part, there weren't too many big plays. A couple other notes I have, volume is king. Kyren Williams is going to get that volume. We actually saw 5 carries from Blake Corum though. So he does exist. Huzzah. On that, but Whittington is emerging as more and more the guy. 10 targets for him, 10 for Atwell, 13 for Colby Parkinson too, actually, in this one.
Yeah, Parkinson's been a big part of this offense, with the injuries to Nakua and Cooper Kupp. They're kind of trying different things every week. Blake Corum just out of nowhere enters the game, get goal line carries, got stuffed, and then, Kyren Williams came in to clean it up and take the touchdown. But either way, I think if you're still holding Blake Corum, at least he's getting on the field. I mean, I think his only true snaps of the season came in that week 2 game against Arizona, where they were down like 30 the entire second half. So this was like the first time that he's actually been used in a real spot this season. You mentioned, the turnovers for Green Bay. I mean, this defense, he got 12 takeaways through 5 games. 5 games, 5 picks for Xavier McKinney in a Packers uniform.
Crazy.
I believe the record for most consecutive picks is Trayvon Diggs, who had six picks in 6 games. So he'll try to tie that next week. It's been a really opportune defense. You can't sustain that week to week. You can't count on generating 2 or 3 turnovers every single week. So that's still a little bit concerning. Got to talk Tucker Kraft, by the way.
Yes.
2 touchdowns for Tucker Kraft. I mean, he's kind of doing a George Kittle impression. He's number 85. The way he runs is very Kittle-like. He's been incredible. I mean, 3 tight ends scored 20 plus PPR points this week for the first time since week 15 of last season. Those being Kittle, Bowers, and Tucker Kraft. Those are now your top 3 tight ends on the season. That's how big of a day it was for Tucker Kraft. He feels like a real weapon for Green Bay, especially if Christian Watson's going to miss more time. And obviously they were without Romeo Doubs, who I don't know what's going on there. I think there's some whispers that it's maybe not role dependent. We'll see. He was technically suspended for this game. I think there's some optimism that they'll get him back in the near future, but can't necessarily count on that. And with Watson and Doubs out of the picture, we saw a lot of Wicks, we saw a lot of Reed, and then it was Malik Heath, who played 45 snaps as well. Bo Melton, kind of a distant wide receiver 4.
Yeah, I speculated it would be Melton, and I was wrong. I picked him up in Scott Fishbowl and used him in a desperation play, where I just keep having guys just get crushed in there. I'm winning and losing players at the same time. It's wild. But Kraft, this is 2 weeks in a row he's been a main red zone option there. I don't think you put the genie back in the bottle, though. I think even when Watson comes back, you're showing that they can trust him there. And it's nice to see the targets are now following the snap share. The snap share was always there. Now you're getting the targets to go with. You like to see it there. All right, let's roll on here. Bears just smashed the Panthers after like the first touchdown for the Panthers, which was a nice run by Chuba Hubbard. Yep. Early on, okay, Carolina's going to look feisty, but the passing game was just awful in this one here. Dalton struggled, but it was just one of those things where everybody seemed like it was covered. They lost Xavier Legette in this game due to injury. Jonathan Mingo can't track the ball on a deep ball. There's a pick where they finally took a deep shot and it was covered, but at the same time, the safety adjusted to the ball. Mingo did not. Never even made a play on the ball.
Yeah, I think my handicap for this game and why I really like the Bears to cover, I don't know if it was what it closed at 3.5 or 4, was the level up in defense that the Panthers would be facing after these previous 2 weeks against the Raiders and the Bengals. And that came to fruition, man. I mean, Andy Dalton under 217.5 passing yards was my favorite prop of the week. I mean, that one, you knew like two series in, you're like, yep, this one's going to be safe. 18 of 28 for 136 yards for Dalton, took 3 sacks, threw the pick as well, like you said. I thought Chuba Hubbard, all things considered, still gave you a solid fantasy day. Like, I hated this matchup for him, but he got the early touchdown. That was nice. Didn't do a whole lot as a pass catcher. I mean, he gave you 4 PPR points on the receptions. He turned those into -2 yards. This is a game where the Bears defense just owned the day. I mean, Bears outscored Carolina 20-0 in the second quarter. Thought this was pretty easily Caleb Williams' best game of his career so far. 20 of 29 for 304 and 2 scores. Bears scored touchdowns on 4 out of 5 drives at one point in the first half. We finally got the DJ Moore breakout game. Hit a couple nice throws down the field to him. Roma Dunze, 5 catches on 6 targets. Still kind of sorting out whether or not he's somebody you could trust week to week. And Keenan Allen just not really startable right now. He played 60 snaps, which is great, but targeted only 6 times and just not seeing enough volume right now.
No. 2 weeks in a row, DeAndre Swift has had juice. He should have scored 2 touchdowns, by the way. Had one pulled back, and then like they had a penalty, and all of a sudden, like Roshan Johnson's in there after Swift had got him to the 1, and that. So, but Swift played very well. I'd caution a little patience here, but I mean, a little, against exuberance because it was against Carolina. Carolina tends to make your offensive players look good, but, though they play Jacksonville. No offense, but I think that they'll look good against Jacksonville too in London.
That's the thing is I'm with you on that. It's like you look at not only this week, but last week against the Rams, you're like, oh, okay, it's awfully coincidental that he turned it around against these 2 teams. And it is worth noting that like literally nothing has changed with DeAndre Swift's role. He's just been more effective the last 2 weeks. So part of it is the defenses, maybe the offensive line is coming around, but you look at the next few matchups here. It's not only Jacksonville next week at the Commanders. I mean, I think that's still a gettable defense. They look better now than they did a couple weeks ago, but it's not a good defense.
Right.
And then you get the Cardinals and the Patriots. I mean, I think there's a kind of a month-long run here where DeAndre Swift is going to be viable. And, he's somebody I was ready to be completely done with going into last week. And I've kind of had to change my tune on that.
Yeah, I came not to bury him, but to praise him. But, it's funny because he didn't get it done against the Colts. And we thought the Colts were a total run funnel. And they're not as run funnely as they did in the past. Weird how teams adjust. They make adjustments, but then, you account for one thing and then you let Trevor Lawrence have the game of his season, if not career. So it's funny how that one works. You try to fix one thing and another thing gets broken there. Okay, let's move on to Broncos Raiders. Brock Bowers, nice little, first series there, but they ended up benching Minshew in this one there. They're playing without Adams. This team's just a dumpster fire.
Yeah, this was the week that I stayed off of Brock Bowers in DFS after using him like crazy the previous 2 weeks. That was a terrible decision. Long touchdown by Bowers to start this game. That was about it for the Raiders offense, though. I mean, he finished 897 and a touchdown on 12 targets. That's fantastic. Broncos fell behind 10-0. I'm watching this game thinking, all right, but can Denver play from behind? They've just all these games that they've won so far. It's been mucky. They're never up or down by more than a score. They answered that pretty emphatically. I mean, that was a disaster start for the Broncos and rallied back and took control of this game much more quickly than I expected. Like you said, Gardner Minshew now benched for the second time already this season. Much like the last time this happened, AOC came in and was no better, threw an interception, just didn't really move the ball at all. Sean Payton got into it with Bo Nix on the sideline at one point, which was interesting. And this is when things were going well for Denver. After the game, he compared Bo Nix to Ferris Bueller. I have not seen that movie. I have no idea what that would be in reference to specifically. Maybe you could speak better on that, Jeff, but that was his quote. He said he's got a little Ferris Bueller in him. But
other he lands on his feet, I guess, is what he's saying. He always ends up turning up lucky is the way I'd interpret that. By the way, I can't believe, I can totally believe you haven't seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off because A, I know you, and B, the movie was made before you were born. So there is, both of those things are true. But it's a very good movie. You should see it at some point in time.
It'll be on the list at some point. Not a whole lot to say here, as you'd expect. Jacoby Myers, 9 targets, 6 for 72. He's the wide receiver 1 going forward, I think, for the Raiders. Even in a bad offense, that means something.
Yeah.
Bo Nix, got to hand it to him, man. I mean, looked pretty good. Hit long plays to 4 different receivers in this game. I mean, Troy Franklin dropped what should have been a beautiful touchdown on a long throw for Bo Nix. I mean, kind of outstretched arms, not a catch that everybody makes, but would have been nice to see him bring that in. 100-yard pick 6 for Pat Surtain on a 1st and goal play. I think that's what started the Minshew benching thoughts from Antonio Pierce. Raiders had a chance to make that a 17-3 game, and all of a sudden, in an instant, it became 10-10, and Denver was off and running. No Zamir White in this game for the Raiders. Alexander Mattison, 15 carries, 38 yards with a long of 8. This Raiders running game is clearly the worst in the NFL.
Yeah.
Madison did outsnap Amir Abdullah 40-31, outcarried him 15-5. Again, if you're really, really in need of running back help, maybe take a look at Madison, but it's a really, really unappealing, offense overall right now.
I'd say Bowers and Myers are about it. And O'Connell is not better than Minshew, by the way.
Nothing's going to change there.
No, in fact, the numbers were demonstrably worse. 4.7 yards per attempt. He threw a pick in his own right. I mean, Minshew made a critical, terrible, horrible mistake, and they're ready to move on. But it's not like O'Connell's like, oh, wow, we've got this kid that we've been grooming, that we highly touted guy. No, he was a late pick in his own right. The thing is, when the Broncos snagged Bo Nix, it threw off the Raiders' plans. I mean, maybe they wanted Bowers all along. Maybe that's it. But the Raiders needed to get a quarterback in this draft, and they didn't.
Yep.
They failed on that respect there. Now they have to wait another year. And who knows? And then it takes the requisite growing pains of developing your next rookie quarterback there. But they failed to find a solution at the most important position in the game, and they're paying the price for that right now. And it's going to be ugly along. My other note here was Javonte Williams. Clearly the guy in the backfield now, 13 for 61. Good day running the ball, 5 for 50 in the receiving game. So all in all, really good fantasy day in PPR leagues for Javonte Williams.
Yep, he continues to dominate snaps, dominate carries on a weekly basis. They're still mixing in some Jaleel McLaughlin, but if there's a back to own in Denver, it is very clearly Javonte Williams.
Yep. All right, last game, and we saved this one for last for a reason because it was terrible. Dolphins Pats. What do you got?
One of my bold predictions this week was that this would be a game where we'd have no touchdowns. We got 2.
Almost there.
We got 2. So that feels like a huge victory. I mean, it didn't feel like there were any touchdowns in this game. I mean, the Patriots scored theirs off of a turnover on like really the only big play of the game from Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, this was possibly even uglier than I thought it would be, to be honest. To end the first half, the Dolphins did the following things: threw a pick, missed a field goal, had a blocked punt, punted, and then missed another field goal because of a snap that like didn't even make it to the holder. Like it was just like a putt from the long snapper, and the holder got it and kind of looked around like, oh boy, this is going to be good, and then just kind of fell on it. I mean, the lack of execution from the Dolphins, who looked like they were going to lose this game for about 80% of it, was stunning. I mean, good for Miami, I guess, to get back in the win column, but this was brutal. I mean, the execution was just as bad as it's been in the last 3 or 4 weeks. They did put together one good drive when they needed it most. They were aided by a big pass interference call on a 3rd and long, but were finally able to punch that in late in the game. New England almost had the go-ahead touchdown with about a minute left. Jalen Polk's foot just barely out of bounds. Got the toe in, right? The heel wasn't in. And then the Pats, I believe, took a false start immediately after that to make that even more difficult. New England, 12 penalties for 105 yards. I mean, that was really the difference in this game that was decided on the margins. In terms of injuries, Devon Achane went out early with a concussion. That was brutal. He left me with like 2.1 fantasy points for the day. But we saw a lot of Raheem Mostert after that. Mostert looked pretty good. 19 carries for 80 yards for an offense that has been, near the bottom of the league in terms of rushing efficiency. Saw a little bit more Tyreek Hill this week. I mean, still not seeing the big plays, but you'll take 6 for 69 on 9 targets. I mean, that's like best case scenario with Tyler Huntley.
Yeah. It is. I thought, and at one point I thought Hill had a big play, and at least according to, I didn't see it, unfortunately, but that clearly didn't happen. 6 for 69. I thought it was noteworthy that the Dolphins were at least able to establish a running game. Jalen Wright, 13 for 86. Raheem Mostert, welcome back, 19 for 80. So they filled in where Achane in the wake of Achane. I think Achane could have been in line for a decent day, but obviously he had the early concussion. Something we're going to watch, especially with the Dolphins. You got to figure they're hyper concerned about concussions now a little bit there. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, they do have the bye next week.
Yeah. So we won't see them. It's true. I'm right with that prediction. We won't see them next week. You're right. They do have the bye. But yeah, this is a team. Talk about a team that desperately needed the bye, though. They're very happy to have that there. Pats, do we see Drake May next week?
I think we're getting there. I think it's getting close. If not next week, I think that pressure is going to just kind of turn up and up. I mean, maybe you give Brissett his last stand at home against Houston, and then you got to go to London. And I would say the Jaguars are the much better matchup for Drake May, but do you want to make him, have his first start overseas? I don't know how much they care about that. It's happening very soon. It's got to happen soon. There's no question about that. I mean, I think the whole point of Jacoby Brissett is he's supposed to be able to game manage you to a win in a game like this, where the Dolphins are just serving it up to you on a platter over and over. And if he's not doing that, I don't really know what the point is. And, it's hard to say. It's like, just waiting 6 weeks versus 8 weeks. Does that prepare Drake May that much more? I'm not sure. But my guess is these discussions have already begun internally. And Drake May probably knows he's going to be out there sometime in the next 3 games.
Yeah, I kind of view it as Brissett's like a pincushion. He's supposed to absorb the pounding until May is ready. And that's what he is doing there. All right. Any other takeaways from this week?
No, not too much, man. Just still waiting for some of the breaks to go our way, with the picks over in staff picks this year. But, had a solid week overall. I know you and I are both having solid fantasy seasons. So not too much to complain about. Jags are back in the win column. I no longer have to wear my Jags gear and just like get sympathy looks from people in public of like, why are you doing this? What's going on? Did you lose a bet?
Are you a fan of The Good Place, Nick? Yeah.
No, I'm not, by the way.
I like that show.
The Good Place.
Really? I like that show, but
I tried to give it a chance. I don't know. Maybe I need to take another look at it. I thought I would like it and I didn't. Maybe because of all the the Jaguars jokes in there. But fun week overall. Should have a fun Monday night game coming. And if you're listening to this at any point Monday, make sure you come join us on SiriusXM Fantasy, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern tonight. We will be live during that Saints-Chiefs game.
Yep. For those of you who streamed along with us, thank you for that. If you're listening on podcast-wise, appreciate you there too. Please hit that like and subscribe buttons. That really helps us. Let's let you know when another podcast is up, not just from Nick and I, but everyone here at RotoWire. So, and if you want to check out our content on the site, you can get a free trial. Go to rotowire.com patreon.com/try. Big thanks for everybody for tuning in. Good luck as you start your prep for week 6.